Election Yard is back, and let's talk about the 2026 governor's races today. There are going to be 36 of them in the United States this year. Of course, the midterm election year is when most states elect their governors, and it's going to be an interesting race. So what we decided to do was we took all 36 of these gubernatorial elections coming up, and we arranged them based on the factor of danger that we assigned to them. In other words, if you're sitting at number 36, we think there's virtually no chance that the race is going to be competitive. But if you're at number 1, there's a very good chance not only that you're in a competitive race, but that your seat could flip partisan control. So let's just begin by showing you how these 36 gubernatorial seats shake out. Well, they're pretty even. 18 Democrats and 18 Republicans. It might not look like that by the time we get through November 2026. So we got a lot of governor's races to talk about, so let's dispense with the pleasantries here and let's get right into them. Now we're going to start at 36 and we're going to work our way up the list. And at number 36, we have Wyoming. This is an open gubernatorial seat held by Republican Mark Gordon. Look, Democrats have had governors elected in Wyoming in this century. Probably not going to happen here. Wyoming is about as red gets at this point. I don't think the Democrats really have a bench in this state at all. It's a very small state in terms of population. Most people tend to vote Republican just out of reflex. So I think Wyoming is just going to be what it is. And another state that is going to pretty much just follow their trend is Oklahoma. Now, this is held by Kevin Stitt, another Republican who is term limited. Democrats, again, a very, very narrow bench in this state. Some of these states towards the bottom, we're going to try to go through fairly quickly, like at number 34. We have Idaho. This is Brad Little. He is eligible, the Republican, to seek re-election in Idaho. The last time a Democrat won a statewide election in Idaho, I mean, you'd really have to strain to think about it. It's been decades since they won any elections of consequence in this state. I mean, they did win a U.S. House seat during one of the Obama waves. I think it was 2008. Other than that, they just really don't win in this state. Now, Vermont is interesting. Vermont is at 33. Vermont, the blue state of Vermont, the progressive state of Vermont, has a Republican governor. He's a liberal Republican, to be sure. His name is Phil Scott. Now, Vermont and neighboring New Hampshire are the only two states that elect their governors on 2-year terms. And I believe Phil Scott is in the process or is expected to run for a 6th 2-year term. So here's the deal. Vermont is definitely a blue state. However, Phil Scott is one of the most popular governors in the country. He is not a conservative Republican. That is for sure. Phil Scott runs for re-election, then this race is going to stay right where it is, at number 33. There's no chance he's going to lose. If Phil Scott, for whatever reason, does not run for re-election, this race goes to number 1. There's absolutely no question about it. So that is a huge swing. Goes from almost the bottom of the list to the top. And the only reason the Republicans hold this seat right now is because of Phil Scott. If he is not there, this seat goes to safe Democratic the microsecond he announces that he's not running for re-election. But as of now, he is, so Vermont will most likely stay red. Number 32, South Dakota, Larry Roden, the Republican governor. He'll get re-elected with no difficulty, as will number 31's governor. This is Massachusetts, Maura Healey, the first-term Democratic governor of Mass. She's going to run for a second term. She will almost certainly win it. Massachusetts does, on occasion, elect Republican governors. They don't elect conservative Republicans, but they do elect Republicans. Of course, they just had, before Maura Healey, they had Charlie Baker as the governor. But I mean, look, Charlie Baker, Bill Weld, they ain't walking through that door. And even if they did, they wouldn't win. So now on to number 30. This is Maryland, Wes Moore. Governor Moore should win re-election fairly easily. They did have a Republican governor before him too, kind of like Massachusetts. Of course, that was Larry Hogan. even so, for a Democrat to lose re-election in Maryland, that's a pretty tall order. Don't really see it happening. I could say the same for a place like Hawaii. Hawaii at number 29. This is Josh Green. He is at this point running for a second term as governor. Not every Democratic governor that Hawaii has had has worked out, but it's pretty common for Hawaii to have Democratic governors. It's pretty common for Hawaii to be just blue up and down the board in general. Hawaii could do some weird things, but I don't see another Linda Lingle out there. So I would expect that Josh Green will get reelected without too much difficulty. So too will Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas. We have this at number 28. And again, at this point, as we're going through the numbers, I wouldn't get too worked up about placements just yet, because whether from 36 to 28 here, all of these seats are pretty safe. There's virtually no chance that any of them are going to flip. Arkansas has really migrated into quite the red state in recent decades, so Huckabee Sanders should win no problem. But now we get to number 27. This is California. Gavin Newsom, the incumbent governor who will probably run for president. I'd be shocked if he doesn't. He is term limited out. California has these big jungle primaries, and you don't know who's going to emerge from them. But I really don't think there's going to be a situation in which the Democratic vote fractures so much that two Republicans make it to the general election. I don't think the Democrats are going to let that happen. So could be Katie Porter, could be Eric Swalwell, could be another Democrat that has yet to really get into the race yet. But the last Republican governor of California was Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he won because he was Arnold and because Gray Davis was extremely unpopular. But California electing a GOP governor at this point just really doesn't seem likely, even though this is an open seat. And even though there are going to be Republicans out there that would say, boy, wouldn't we love to win California? Well, probably ain't going to happen. Moving over number 26, this is Rhode Island. The incumbent governor here is Dan McKee. He is running for another term. Now, Rhode Island is an interesting state. Rhode Island is definitely blue, but Rhode Island has elected Republican governors in my lifetime. Off the top of my head, one of them was Lincoln Almond, and the other one was Don Carcieri. So the thing, though, with Rhode Island is, in a lot of these blue states, just like a lot of the red states, flipping it around the inverse, the Republicans don't really have a bench in Rhode Island. Probably the best candidate they had run in the last decade for any office at any level in the state was Alan Fung, and he lost all of those elections. So there's really not a whole hell of a lot of hope for the GOP in Rhode Island. So I would think that McKee, or hey, he is getting primaried, because the Democratic primary is usually the way to ensure yourself that getting into office in Rhode Island, at least at the statewide level. If McKee gets through his primary, he shouldn't have much trouble in the general election. Number 25, interesting. This is Illinois. The incumbent governor here is J.B. Pritzker. It looks like Pritzker will be running again. It looks like Pritzker could run for president in 2028. He did have a spirited campaign in 2022. Keep in mind, though, 2022, the last time that most of these governors were up for re-election, that was a more Republican slanted year. Now, granted, it was not as Republican as it could have been, but it was a more Republican year. I really don't think that governors in blue states like this, and when we get to New York, we'll talk about this a little more. I just don't think that a lot of these governors in blue states that are running for re-election are going to have a lot of difficulty given the environment that it looks like we're going to have in 2026. So moving on now, Alabama at 24. This is interesting. Kay Ivey, the Republican governor, she is term limited out. The Republican candidate here is going to most likely be Senator Tommy Tuberville. The Democratic candidate is most likely going to be Doug Jones, who lost that 2020 Senate race to Tommy Tuberville. Of course, he won that 2017 special election to flip that seat. So Doug Jones, probably the only Democrat with real cred to win at a statewide level. in Alabama, but even at that, it's still Alabama in 2026. It's a very, very red state. The Democrats got the best candidate for this race that they could have come up with, but it's still most likely going to be a really tall order. If any Democrat could flip this seat, it's probably Doug Jones, but he's got a lot of uphill climbing to do here. So Nebraska, Jim Pillen, the Republican, looks like he'll be running for re-election. Out in Nebraska, Democrats don't really have much of a bench, but I think the Democrats' focus in Nebraska in 2026 will probably be flipping that second district. Don Bacon, the Republican, is not running for re-election, so the Democrats going to probably go all in on trying to flip the second. I'm sure they would love to win the governor's race, but it's pretty unlikely at this point. Moving on to number 22, this is Tennessee. Bill Lee, the incumbent Republican, is term limited out. Looks like the GOP is going to be running Senator Marsha Blackburn here. She will be the favorite in this race. Again, another situation where Democrats don't really have a bench here in the state. I'm sure they'll find somebody to run, but the Democrats don't really have too many politicians in the state right now with a lot of profile. I mean, hey, they had that special election with Afton Bain out in the 7th District of Tennessee, but she is safely running for her state house district, which she'll be reelected to easily. Other than that, the Democrats don't really have a lot of profile candidates here in Tennessee at this point. So New York, we said we were going to talk about this. We have this at number 21 on the list right now. Kathy Hochul is the incumbent. She's running for another term. She is being primaried by her lieutenant governor. But recently, Hochul, who has been somewhat unpopular in New York, she seems to be having a little bit more of a renaissance. I think at this point, she probably would beat Antonio Delgado in a primary, but we'll let that process play out. Now, Hochul did have a bit of a tough run in 2022. Democrats in 2022 in New York did kind of have a bad year. They did rebound, I guess, a little bit in 2024, but Lee Zeldin, when he ran against Kathy Hochul in 2022, made it closer than I think a lot of people expected. Of course, there were some factors in that the Democratic brand in New York wasn't that great in 2022, but also the Democratic brand in general in the U.S. wasn't that great, which allowed, I think, Lee Zeldin to make it a closer race than expected. Elise Stefanik was going to run for governor. She dropped out. It looks like Bruce Blakeman, he's the executive of Nassau County. It looks like he is going to run in this seat, but, you know, unless he can kind of catch lightning in a bottle and run a campaign just like laser focused on crime, kind of like Lee Zeldin did, I don't know if it's going to work. And again, I think it's shaping up to be a blue year at this rate. It's way too early to say it's going to be like a blue wave or anything like that. It's only January, so at the time we recorded this, so we can't really say that yet. But I really struggle to see how a lot of these Democratic incumbents in blue states are going to really be challenged too seriously. I still think New York is too blue anyway, but Hochul right now is probably in an okay spot, a better spot than I would have thought she'd be in a year ago. Moving on now to Connecticut. This is number 20. This is next door to New York, the incumbent governor, Ned Lamont. He's going to be running for a third term. Connecticut governors are not term limited. Ned Lamont seems to be doing okay for himself. I think Lamont will probably be fine. The GOP, they have a couple of candidates to pick from. They may end up going with Erin Stewart. She was the Republican mayor of New Britain, Connecticut for a couple of terms. She's young, she's telegenic, she's relatively popular, but it's still going to be an uphill challenge against somebody like Ned Lamont, who is now an established political figure in Connecticut. Number 19, we're going to move to South Carolina. This is an open seat. The incumbent governor, Henry McMaster, is not running for re-election, cannot run for re-election. And the Republicans might go with Nancy Mace, the congresswoman who has made a lot of news for various reasons over the years. The Democrats, again, South Carolina. Now, in South Carolina, it's not maybe as bad as some other states, but the Democrats really don't have much of a bench in South Carolina at the statewide level, but you never know. You never know. We have this at 19. South Carolina does have some Democratic streaks that run through it, but at the end of the day, it's still a red state. It just happens to not be as red as some of the other states we talked about, but whatever Republican comes out of that primary will most likely be the favorite. We move to number 18. This is Oregon. The incumbent Democrat, Tina Kotek, is running for a second term now. When she ran for her first term in 2022, that was a really weird election because you had the Republican candidate, the Democratic candidate, and then you had an independent that was siphoning a lot of votes from the Democrat. It was a close race, but Kotek ended up winning. Unless there's some sort of a dynamic like that, I would imagine the Democrats will win. Now, over the decades, I have watched Oregon gubernatorial elections with some curiosity. Republicans have repeatedly thought, well, we have a good candidate. This is our time. We're finally going to flip it. And then something happens and they don't do it. They get close and close and close and close. But it just ends up that they can't close the deal. I see no real reason why at this point that wouldn't be the case. And again, you have an incumbent Democrat running for re-election in a blue state, and I think it's shaping up to be a Democratic year. So I do think Kotek should be considered the favorite here. Colorado, this is an open seat. Jared Polis, the incumbent Democrat, cannot run for re-election. Colorado hasn't elected a Republican governor in a while at this point. Colorado has kind of morphed into a relatively solid blue state. Now, of course, it's not all parts of Colorado that are blue. If you go out into eastern Colorado, that's pretty red. And then in some portions in western Colorado, like out by Grand Junction, and then, of course, the Colorado Springs area is pretty red. But then as you really, zero in around Denver and the surrounds, that's pretty blue. And that blueness just pretty much pulls the rest of the state towards it. There's really been no sign that I've seen throughout the years that would suggest that Colorado is ripe for a flip. And then, of course, you consider the fact that Michael Bennet, the senator, is running for this seat. I think Bennet should be considered the favorite not only to win his primary, but the whole thing. So theoretically, Colorado could be in play, but probably not. 16 states to go, and at number 16, we have Texas. Texas, this has been another white whale for the Democrats. They have wanted to flip Texas back for decades, and they keep falling flat on their face. The Republican incumbent here, Greg Abbott, is going to be running again. Abbott should be considered the favorite in this race. If the Democrats are going to flip a seat, I don't think this is the one that they're going to really push all their chips to the middle for. That'll probably be the Senate race. And there may actually be some reason to think that the Senate race could be far more interesting than the gubernatorial election. So for now, short of any sort of major developments on the gubernatorial race, I think you can safely consider Greg Abbott the favorite, though maybe it's not as much of a slam dunk as like Wyoming or Idaho would be for the Republicans. It should still be a win. Next door, we go to number 15. This is New Mexico. Michelle Lujan Grisham is the incumbent. She cannot seek re-election. New Mexico has, of course, had Republican governors. They had Susana Martinez. They had Gary Johnson back when he was a Republican. So New Mexico can elect Republicans. They've just been doing a lot less of it lately. Over the last decade or two, they don't do it quite so much anymore. Democrats should be fine no matter who they come out of the primary with. There's always a chance the Republicans could find the right candidate and make it interesting. But New Mexico, I think, at its core is a moderately blue state. So I think the Democrats probably going to be okay here. But you never know. There's always a possibility that a race could rise up here. Now, Alaska, this is interesting because had Mary Peltola run for governor, this would have been much higher up the list, and it would have been a potential flip. Mary Peltola, the former Democratic congresswoman, she is going to run for Senate now. I still have Alaska at 14 because even though the Republicans should probably be favored here regardless, Alaska does some weird shit sometimes. Political party affiliation in Alaska doesn't always mean a whole lot. Sometimes alliances and coalitions just kind of bleed over, and Alaska is a little bit like Maine in that Alaska is just going to do whatever the hell Alaska is going to do. So, there could be somebody that comes out of nowhere and just kind of barnstorms in. There could be some other Democrat out there that does that. There could be an independent that gets in and makes things really interesting. You would think the Republicans are going to probably win, but Alaska does some crazy stuff politically, so just keep the door open to that for now. At number 13, we have Florida. Now, once upon a time, as Ron DeSantis is not eligible to run for another term, Florida, this would have been one of the top 3 races on the board. Even though the Democrats were a lot like Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football, just losing close race after close race after close race. Now they're losing more substantially. There is still the theoretical possibility that the Democrats could do something here. It's probably not going to happen at this point, mostly just because we haven't really seen too many signs of life from Democrats in Florida at all. If there's any year that they're going to make a move, it would probably be this year, assuming things get a little bluer, but the Democrats have a lot of work to do in Florida. Number 12, we have Minnesota here, and we're going to put the caveat here. Tim Walz, of course, incumbent governor, has decided not to run for re-election. We would have this race at number 12, granted that Amy Klobuchar, the senator, runs for this seat. If she doesn't run, this would rise up much higher. We would probably have this something like 7th if Amy Klobuchar doesn't run. But right now, the thinking is that maybe she will. So for now, we have this at 12. I think the Republicans would have much rather run against Tim Walz going for a 3rd term than running against somebody like Amy Klobuchar, whom not only can the Republicans not beat in any elections, but they really don't even come close. I mean, it seems like Amy Klobuchar wins all her Senate races in landslides. So if she ends up getting into this race, she will hands down be the favorite to win. If not, we would recalibrate this list. Now at number 11, we have Ohio. The incumbent here is Mike DeWine. He cannot run for re-election. Now, Democrats, it has been well recorded that the Democrats have done very, very little here in Ohio over the last handful of years. Sherrod Brown won a Senate race there in 2018. He lost in 2024. He's going to hope to get back in 2026. At the gubernatorial level, Democrats have had very, very little to be happy about. In the state of Ohio, the Republicans may end up running Vivek Ramaswamy as their nominee. He, of course, was a Republican presidential candidate, got involved with Doge and Elon Musk, and is a noted figure on the political right. Democrats might run Amy Acton, who certainly doesn't have the profile of Vivek at this point. Ohio has really become much more of a red state. Democrats, of course, are going to hope that they make some progress here, but at this point, it looks unlikely, although some of what you've seen is that if Vivek is the Republican nominee, that maybe he won't do as well as maybe a generic Republican would. So we'll put a bookmark on this. We have it at number 11. I don't, in my gut, think that Ohio would flip if the election were held today, but, we'll keep an eye on that one. Number 10, New Hampshire. Kelly Ayotte running for a 2nd term. She was elected to her first 2-year term. In 2024, of course, she was a former senator. She had some time out of politics. Now she's back. She's running for re-election as governor. It has happened in New Hampshire that a governor has won a single term and then lost re-election. So in the early 2000s, the Republicans flipped the governorship of New Hampshire. A guy named Craig Benson won that governor's race. And then 2 years later, he was out on his ass again because John Lynch, the Democrat, beat him. At this point, I don't know who that Democrat would be that would challenge Kelly Ayotte. New Hampshire is probably more Democratic than it isn't. But for right now, I think Kelly Ayotte is probably okay. But of course, this is all pending whether or not the Democrats are able to find some big recruit somewhere in New Hampshire. Of course, they also have an open Senate race, which they have Congressman Chris Pappas running for. So I think Democrats might be more focused on keeping the Senate seat than keeping both of their congressional seats in New Hampshire. The governor's race may get away from them. The governorship has been Republican for a little while. You had Chris Sununu before Kelly Ayotte. So I don't know. I'm not going to say that they're going to give Ayotte a free pass in this election, but for right now, theoretically, this race is in play, but I don't know who the Democrats are going to go with yet. Number 9 is Maine. Janet Mills, the incumbent Democrat, cannot run for a third term. Now, Republicans have won elections here, and kind of like I said about Alaska, I say it much more about Maine, and I've said it many times about Maine. Maine is a state that you cannot put into any one political box. You cannot fit them into any particular classification, or you can't fit them to any particular labels. Maine is as independent a state politically as there is in the United States. They could elect a conservative Republican. They could elect a liberal Democrat. They could elect an independent. And they do these things regularly. So the Democrats, one of the candidates running is Angus King's son, Angus King III. Of course, Angus King, former governor, now a senator. His son is actually running as a Democrat. But they have other strong candidates in this race as well. The Democrats, the Republicans don't have much of a bench. There was some word that maybe former Congressman Bruce Poliquin might get into the race. He might make it interesting. You can count on there being an independent in this race somewhere, and that independent will probably get 15% of the vote just rolling out of bed. So Maine gubernatorial elections are very interesting. Way too early to say, so I think number 9 is a good spot for them right now. Moving on to number 8, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. Shapiro running for a second term. People have been talking about him potentially running in 2028, but he's got to get through 2026 first. Pennsylvania, of course, did move to the right in 2024. This was after Josh Shapiro won big against a bad candidate, Doug Mastriano, in 2022. Mastriano was not running again. It looks like Stacey Garrity, she is the state treasurer. It looks like she will be the Republican nominee. I think this will be a closer race, but at this point, I think Shapiro's probably all right, but this race should be considered in play just because of how Pennsylvania has been trending. Iowa, we have it number 7. So Kim Reynolds, the incumbent Republican, is not running for re-election. She was eligible to run for re-election. Iowa governors, I don't believe, have term limits, which is why Terry Branstad served like 90 terms as governor. So Kim Reynolds is not running for re-election. The Republicans might go with somebody like Randy Feenstra, who is a congressman. The Democrats, it looks like, are leaning towards Rob Sand. He is the state auditor, so a Democratic statewide official. This one actually could be pretty close. Iowa has gotten redder over the last decade, but there have been signs in Iowa in the last year or so, and we're talking at the micro level with state special elections and whatnot. Iowa definitely, there's something going on there where Iowa has gotten bluer at the local level. So it's worth keeping an eye on. You would think that the Republicans would still be favored here, but I think the Democrats might have a good candidate in Sand, and I really do think this race should be watched. So Georgia, we have them at number 6. This is an open Republican seat. Incumbent Governor Brian Kemp cannot run for another term. A lot of Republicans look like they're going to be getting into the race here. One of them is Brad Raffensperger. He is the Secretary of State, the guy that Donald Trump called and said, you need to find me 11,780 votes. The Democrats, one of the Democrats running is Keisha Lance Bottoms. She was the mayor of Atlanta. We know that Stacey Abrams, who's run a couple of times for this office, she is not going to be running again for governor. There are going to be a lot of people in this race on both sides. I would say Georgia is reddish. It's probably not as red as it used to be. Democrats haven't won the governorship in this state in a while. But there was also once upon a time they had 0 out of 2 Senate seats, and then they ended up winning both of them on the same night. So I guess you could say anything is possible here. If the Democrats find the right candidate, then this could really be a very interesting race. Number 5, this is Nevada. The incumbent governor here, Joe Lombardo, is running for a second term. Of course, he flipped the seat in 2022. I think it would be a bit of a surprise if this race wasn't competitive one way or another, just based on how close Nevada seems to be. And as of right now, it looks like the Democrats might go with Aaron Ford. He is the state's attorney general. He's certainly the most prominent candidate in the race. There's also word that maybe Steve Sisolak, the former Democratic governor who lost to Lombardo in 2022, that he might be interested in running. But I think the Democrats would have a decent candidate in Ford, and I would just expect a close race one way or another. Moving on to number 4, this is Arizona. The incumbent governor here is Katie Hobbs. She is running for a second term. Now, of course, the governor's race in Arizona in 2022 was one of the most heavily watched races in the country. You had Hobbs versus Kari Lake. It ended up being very close. It took days before we knew that Hobbs was the winner here. So the Republicans, a couple of congressmen are running in this one. You've got Andy Biggs, and then you've also got David Schweikert. So those are 2 Republicans that are in the race. The Republicans are going to come hard after Arizona. Arizona is still probably redder than it isn't, but Democrats have had more success in the state in recent years. Hobbs seems to be relatively popular, not really creating a ton of controversy. So she seems to be starting this campaign in a good spot. Like I said, I do expect the Republicans to really come for it. But I feel like Republicans in Arizona in recent years, they've been getting pretty greedy. They've been running candidates in some races like Kari Lake or like Blake Masters, who have been pretty aggressively conservative. And that isn't really where Arizona is right now. Arizona seems to be a little bit more of a centrist state when you take all of its political leanings and combine them together. So I think Katie Hobbs is a little bit more of an ideological fit for the state than most likely whomever the Republicans are going to nominate. But I still do think this is going to be a very competitive race. So number 3, this is Michigan. Michigan, this is going to be a really interesting race. Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent Democrat, cannot run for re-election. So what's going on here? The Democrats, you might end up with somebody like Jocelyn Benson. She's the Secretary of State. The GOP could end up with somebody like John James. He is a congressman. But Mike Duggan, the Detroit mayor, a former Democrat, is running as an independent. And recent opinion polling suggests he could pull down well into the double digits and really just completely throw this race for a loop. So I think number 3 is a good spot for this race. And frankly, given the volatility with the independent being in the race, I couldn't even begin to make a guess as to what's going to happen in Michigan. So this is going to be a very, very competitive race. So Wisconsin, that is at number 2. The incumbent Governor Tony Evers has decided not to run for a third term. His former lieutenant governor, Mandela Barnes, is going to be running. His current lieutenant governor, Sarah Rodriguez, is going to be running as a Democrat, whereas you also could have, in addition to a Republican like Tom Tiffany, the congressman from northern Wisconsin, he is in the running. You could also have Tim Michels, who has run for office in Wisconsin in the past. So I think the Democrats probably have the deeper candidate pool at this point, but just given how things have been going in Wisconsin, I would not assume that this will be an easy Democratic victory. In fact, I think on the contrary, I think the Democrats are going to have to work very hard to hold on to this one. And then number 1 on the list, the only race out of the 36 we haven't talked about yet. This is Kansas. The incumbent Democrat is Laura Kelly. She cannot run for re-election. She won in 2018. Chris Kobach, the Republican, really struggled through that campaign, to put it charitably. Laura Kelly ends up surprising the nation by flipping that seat, gets re-elected in 2022. She can't run again. And of course, as you know, the Democrats' bench in Kansas is not very good. The Republican list of candidates is a mile long at this point. So you know that if they flip no other governorships in 2026, that you would think that they'll circle this one as the one that they would get, because Kansas is, generally speaking, a red state. So that's it. We just ran through all 36 governor's races, and we arranged them by the amount of danger of flipping that they're in. And we're going to do this soon with the Senate. In the meantime, like and subscribe here at Election Yard. Check us out on social media. We'll see you soon.